right, I think we're on. Yeah, we're on. Yesterday was a bit of a goat rope with technical stuff. So if you watch the uploaded video, you'll notice that it froze in the middle and it didn't go live stream. There are all kinds of things going on yesterday. That's the way it is. This is all being worked out. And I do live in rural Georgia, so there is no competition for internet provision. And as we know, competition leads people to improve their service in a way they might not otherwise. We might talk about that and some other things about economics, some different ways of looking at things with Father Gregory Jensen. But first, let's do our deep breathing and get ready for Father Gregory as he waits in the green room. All right, so here we go. We're going to breathe in, say the first half, breathe out, say the second half. We'll do it together. It'll be very good for us, bring peace into our lives. Ready? Let's breathe in. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Last time. Breathe in slowly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, pause. Breathe out slowly. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Pause. Okay, resume your breathing, because it's time for us to cheer and say hello to our good friend up north, our favorite Yankee.
Please.
Wait, let's see if I can do something.
Yeah, it just... My brother teases me because, he was raised... We're both born in Texas. He was raised there. I was raised in Connecticut. He says, you're not really a Texan. Yeah, ouch. Well... And Dad loves you better, so let's move on. So...
Oh, wow. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing about America, right? Is our sense of home is a bit different than it is in maybe other places and times. Right? Because you identify as a Texan, as far as I can tell.
I do. I don't use the phrase identify because that's awkward.
Awkward.
But it's just. Yeah, I never really fit in New England. I went back to Texas. I was like, oh, okay, this is why.
I see.
So though I do have a propensity to pronounce all my vowels and my final G's. So.
Yeah.
And
how do you say lobster roll?
Well, it depends on to whom I am with whom I am speaking.
If you're
I would probably say lobster roll.
Okay.
Yeah, I can talk about parking the car in the yard and getting butter and put it in the drawer in the fridge, but I don't. So
you know what? I'm gonna go have some lobster rolls on Thursday, Lord willing. So there's a food truck. It's going to be down here. It's South Carolina. You know what? So my friends from in Rhode Island are like,
well, yeah. Well,
but
I'm allergic to... Go ahead.
Yeah, but the pictures look great. They advertise on Facebook. They say where the food truck's going to be, and it's going to be just over in Anderson, which is right across the border. So I'm like, we had lobster rolls... when was it? Just a few months ago. They had them at Captain D's. Do you remember Captain D's? Probably don't have those up in...
Yes.
Yeah. Where you can get...
I know about them, yeah.
Proper,
there were some in Ohio last year there as well, I think.
Yeah. So for y'all, it's a fish place. They have hush puppies and lots of fried fish. And they also had lobster rolls for a little while. It was so cool. But you're allergic to lobster?
Well, I am allergic to all things crustacean. Yes. So, for years I could get by with being polite and Benadryl, but the last time I tried, my throat closed up when I went to swallow. So, okay, we're done now.
Yeah. Yeah, lobster's good, but it's not that good.
Yeah, it just very. So anyway, well, I hope you enjoy your lobster roll. Excuse me, a lobster roll.
I think I have to order it as they don't even call it. I think what they call it, lobster on a hot dog roll or something like that, or lobster hot dogs, or they had some kind of weird name for it. God bless them.
Well, there you go. So, well, I'm glad you're going to get your seafood fix there in rural Georgia.
Yeah, kind of a waste that it's on a Thursday, but yeah, we do what we have to. I'm an ascetic at heart, so having lobster on Thursday, I don't mind giving up meat on it.
There you go. Well, yeah, it's a hard life you've got, Father. Persevere.
I'm glad you appreciate that.
Oh, excuse me.
So, how is your community?
I think probably stressed. We're down, like the rest of the parishes in the diocese, we're down to liturgy with just your servant and a chanter. I think we're a little bit, I think our phased opening is going to be ahead of, say, New York and New Jersey. So, I have really just two chanters, so and then a choir. So I think we're getting to the point now. Probably talk about maybe two chanters, because it's a bit much on the two people. They've been carrying the load since for the last 6 weeks. So aside from that, it's just we're just waiting.
How's the economy up there? How's job security for your people?
A fair number of the people in the parish have jobs that they can do from home, or they have jobs where, for example, they have jobs where they can go on. They're essential workers, so they can go on site, and on site is going to an empty building. So that's good. So the mission is fine in that regard. I think the real problem is the rest of the state. Madison is pretty much the university and the state government. So, but the rest of the state, except for Milwaukee, most of Wisconsin is actually fairly rural. So we have farmers who are destroying product now. They're dumping dairy, and so soon crops will just be. We're getting ready for the first cycle of harvesting, so people will start destroying crops.
So, Father Gregory, this is something that some of our listeners may not understand, how you could have something that people need there, and it's getting destroyed in the fields instead of getting processed and delivered to people who need it. Why is this happening? Why is it that you can have people who need milk and cheese in New York City and they can't make anything there and are willing to pay money for it, and then you have people in Madison, in Wisconsin, who are producing those things, are willing to sell it for money, and and part of what's happening here is that people are just showing up on the farms and the farmers are selling it directly. But I think that a lot of this is sort of a function of the various shelter-in-place orders. And, it has had, and I think will continue to have, a depressing effect on the economy. And, and that's, contrary to what sometimes it's phrased, this is not a matter of just about money, but, about making sure that things about productivity, but also about people's sense of their own value and dignity. A depressed economy has a lot of implications. Right.
And so New York is going without cheap dairy product that we're destroying in Wisconsin.
Right, and we use words. Both of us are, political economists. We study this, and we use words like efficiencies. The price mechanism is the most efficient ways of serving the people's needs. Having an open market is the most efficient way to run an economy. And that language is so dry and it's so abstract from where people live, that they don't really hear what we're saying.
No, they don't. Take for example. We talked, for example, about market efficiency. What we really mean is that the best way to be not only personally productive, but also productive as a community, is to allow people to make free decisions, to engage in free exchange. We wouldn't, for example, think about a government system for matchmaking. We have a concern that the right people get married, and that they have children. So we're going to have a government program to centralize that process, because we really have some questions about the ability of individuals to make these decisions. And there are a whole lot of negative consequences to people just picking their own spouses. Divorce, domestic violence, child abuse, child abandonment. Maybe we should have a centralized system. Part of the difficulty, so that we hear that and we think it's absurd, unless of course you were living in Wisconsin in the 20s and a little before then, when eugenics was sort of of interest here.
Yeah, and of interest and supported by science, the intellectual class.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to go off on a diatribe against science, but I mean, Christians do. Christians don't have our dark moments as well. But I think a lot of it is economists tend to speak in fairly dry terms, without romance, as it were. But I think we are generally better off when we are able to make our own decisions freely, and that's not just a matter of lack of government coercion, which is a fairly thin version of freedom, but whether we have a sense that we can engage in productive work, that we can engage in work that is of value and of importance to others, which is, when we're talking about profit, that's really economic profit. That's what we're really talking about. I do something that you value. I do something that's important to you.
Right, and profit is, like all pricing and things, it's a signal, right? It's a signal, and it's a very, again, use the dry word, efficient signal. It means something. It means someone is willing to sacrifice for the thing that you have done. Right, just saying, right. Oh, we sure do love you. We're praying. We love what you do. Oh, it's also your farmer. Oh, I love farm. No, I'm willing to work hard and then send money your way so that I can get what it is that you do. It's a signal. It's information, but it's more than information, because human beings are more than just computers, right? It's
right.
So value is tied up in it. Not just the value of how much something costs, but you were saying self-worth. If I heard you correctly, we're going to have not just these huge inefficiencies where people are hungry and there's abundance being destroyed in other places, right? That's inefficiencies. That's bad. But we're also going to have suffering there. But we're also going to have existential suffering. People who
right.
don't know what it is that's going on, but know that their world got darker.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, there are two things. The UN recently published a study that suggests, there is going to be there's a potential for large-scale hunger and starvation because of pandemic restrictions. There's fairly good data out there that suggests, especially as it continues, unemployment leads to an increase in negative health outcomes, substance abuse, not just substance abuse and suicide, but smoking, high cholesterol, diabetes, things like that. But as well, one of the long-term economic concerns, actually, especially if you're concerned about healthcare, is that a drop in productivity means a drop in innovation, and that's hard to recover from. You've heard the story about one grain of rice on a chessboard, and then two, and it's doubled, and this is what the servant wants for payment. And by the time you get to one grain of rice lifted to the 64th, doubled to the 64th power, it's more rice than all the rice in the world. These dips in productivity are magnified over the course of years.
Okay, so you use the word productivity. You use the word productivity.
Well,
again, another dry word. What you're saying is there's
yeah.
less. It's people need that abundance. They need that productivity. They need that innovation.
Yeah. The problem isn't just that there's less, but it's less in ways which are unknown. And so we just like we aren't really clear. We have a lot of uncertainty about the COVID-19 virus. But we also have a lot of uncertainty as to the economic consequences of the various shutdown orders. So what we're looking at is we're trying to make evaluations between two things which are largely unknown. But one thing that we do know is that as governments start spending more money, they spend money by borrowing, which means that essentially we're as we say, discounting the lives of our children and grandchildren relative to what's going on today. In other words, saying, to keep us safe today, we're going to borrow money that our children and grandchildren have to pay back. So we're going to saddle the next 2 generations, 3 generations with debt, but we're also going to do things which likely will decrease the amount of wealth and productivity available for them to pay down that debt.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to step back for just a second and explain to people what we're doing and what we're not doing. So one of the things, if you're spending time following this on media, what you'll notice is that there's an attempt to frame what we're going through right now in one term or another. And maybe there are 2 or 3 different frames. But the main ones are the frame of safety, right? Lockdown, safety, all these other things. And the other thing is the frame of, freedom and economic efficiency, right? And, because of the way our media is set up, it puts those 2 ideas at war with each other, right? And what I hope, that's not what we're doing. You may have heard us doing that, but that's because you brought that to the table, right? What we're saying is that there are these different dimensions that need to be figured out. And any time that you have a question, an ethical question, you can't just frame it in one dimension. You have to frame it in all the relevant dimensions. And that's what we're doing. So if you heard us say, we don't care about lives, you brought that to the table. We're priests.
I mean, priests are not jerks among the priesthood are not unknown, but
you almost made me spit my coffee out here on air.
I apologize, but what the question is that we're looking at lives known and unknown. It's much easier, for example, to think about a young mother dying of COVID-19 in a hospital in New York. I mean, that's much easier to sympathize with that, to be concerned about that, than it is sort of the slow death of someone, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. One of the reasons I became attracted to economics is because economics is among other things concerned with not only with what's seen, but as Bastiat says, what's unseen. And as a priest, I have to be concerned about not only with what people see, but what they don't see, what's sort of just outside the field of their vision. And so it isn't enough simply to say we have to be concerned about the people who are ill today. Yes, absolutely we do. But there are other costs. We'd say in economics, or there are other consequences. We'd say in ethics to today's decisions, most of which are really unknown, and frankly can't be known. So again, we come back to the fact that we're making decisions about things that we don't really have we don't understand. We understand some aspects of it.
Right. And we do know
there's other things that we don't.
Right. Yeah, we talked about this before, the difference between uncertainty and risk, and how, the tools are not transferable, right? And
No.
But here's the thing, we do know, if we're trying to, get back to our ideas of, if we're trying to protect ourselves from complete disaster. So whether you want to think of that as maximizing the minimum that we'll get out of this situation, right, or minimizing the maximum damage done to us is just semantics. But we know that if we did nothing, if we just said, here's some information, y'all, we think this is a really bad disease, we think it's serious, right, and we believe the best thing for you to do is as much as possible avoid contact with other people and so on, so that people made their own subsidiary decisions, right, at the local level. If we'd have just let it go, it would have been, really bad because of the different qualities of this virus, right? So that's one end. So we avoided that huge catastrophe. On the other end, we also know what can happen if an economy collapses. It can be propped up in the short time with things like printing more money, sending out checks, borrowing money and stuff. But we know that bill comes due, and that there are tragic consequences. There are tragic consequences with trying to identify what people need and just do it by fiat, right? So in D.C., they come up with the idea of what needs to be done, how we're going to get the milk from Madison to New York, and just order it done. Again, short term, okay, but we know that in the last 100 years, we know how many millions of people have been killed because of that kind of inefficiency, right? So those are the two things those are the two twin disasters that we have to avoid. And if we try to minimize the risk of one, if we try to completely get rid of the risk of the virus, we run the huge risk of this economic collapse. If we say, we got to protect the economy, then we maximize the damage done by the virus, right? So these are two of the major dimensions that we have to, and we can't just demonize people who bring up the other side. This should be on all of our radars. Is we have to balance these things. We can't do this black and white thinking, this reduction of cognitive dissonance thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. No, and I'm right. And I was because I've been thinking about the last couple of days, and I mean, I shouldn't have to say it, but I think it will. I mean, anyone who's been listening, for example, to the sermons for liturgy when I've served liturgy, any service actually since the pandemic and the shutdowns, I always come back to the necessity of being obedient, or being holding to the guidelines that are articulated, and people have gotten a little irritated with me because I've responded. It's like the worst that you can say about the guidelines is they're imprudent, but imprudent laws are not unjust laws, and we can resist and disobey unjust laws, but it's just if we can't rebel against imprudent laws or even stupid laws, because if we did, we'd never get anything done. But but you're right. I mean, what's happened? One of the things that's caused us some difficulty, and this, by the way, this happens even among priests, and is that we've taken on the rhetoric, the rhetorical stylings, the argumentation styles of pundits, and we've tried to reduce things to the simplest possible explanation, or to put it somewhat more in somewhat more generous terms, we look for the one thing that really matters more than anything else, and we run everything through that lens. So yeah, it just, human, biological life is not the single most important norm, but neither is economic viability or economic wealth. And for example, a lot of the protests that happened here in Wisconsin, the state capital, they really were concerned. There was a concern that the values which should matter more than anything else were basically personal liberty and economic productivity. These are great things, absolutely, but they can't be the only set of concerns out there. And as you say, you have to learn to balance. And you need to. Aristotle says the virtue is finding the mean between the extremes. Yeah, so you have to find that balance point between all of these different concerns.
Okay, so I'm sorry. You brought up a third dimension there, and it's one I wanted to get to. So the more obvious ones are the virus, the risk to health, and then the economic, the risk to our well-being. And then you brought up this respect for authority, which is another one. And this is not one that particularly I recognize the need, but this is the one that a lot of us are like, no. Virtue, freedom, right? So talk to me a little, convince me. Tell me why it is that I shouldn't, either challenge it by going against it, and we can talk about exit, voice, and loyalty in a minute, right? The different options that we have. But why I shouldn't, go around it, find the loopholes, break away at the edges, storm the Capitol, whatever.
And again, to answer the question, we've got to decide: are we talking about in general or in this specific instance?
When it's imprudence at worst.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think. Well, first of all, I think anyone who imagined that the initial regulations were going to be anything other than imprudent is just naive. You're making a decision under, in the face of massive uncertainty, and so the most likely, the most reasonable decision to make is to become somewhat more, frankly, draconian. You need to, lock things down because you don't know. All right, that's and then as you get more data, as things develop, you can begin to tailor that. This is what you do with your children. You don't start with a philosophy you don't start philosophy when the child's born. Your actions are somewhat more global, and then you start to tailor as the child grows and the relationship develops. So that's fine. But I think the first thing to keep in mind as Orthodox Christians, we are not anarchists. Contrary to what some of my anarcho-capitalist friends think, we are not anarchists. Yes, we acknowledge that government is a result of the fall, and it's something that comes relatively late in humanity's relationship with God. Israel demands a king after having been a theocracy for a very long time. But a government does exist, and it is, even if it is a consequence of sin, it is not itself sinful. Rather, governments exist one of the great phrases from social concept of the Orthodox Church, from the Moscow Patriarchate, not to turn earth into heaven, but to keep it from degrading into hell. And so that needs to be respected. To be sure, there are different instruments, and you're the political scientists. So, there are different ways of a community preserving order, or at least keeping from that and going down into hell. But historically in the church, we've respected the authority of the government, and we've only rejected that authority when the government has asked us to do something which is contrary to the will of God. So, as long as what the government is telling me is not... Oh, there we go. Sorry, we froze. Are we back? Okay, yeah, as long as what the government is asking me is not fundamentally immoral. The government can say to me, Father Gregory, we don't want lots of people in your church because we risk a pandemic. Because of the pandemic. They cannot say, Father Gregory, because of the pandemic, we want you to worship Zeus. The fact of the matter is, let's just be blunt. 70% of the Orthodox Christians in America weren't going to be in church last Sunday anyway. So, and of the 3 out of 10 who are in church, let's be honest, probably 1 or 2 out of those 3 weren't going to go to Holy Communion. So, we're getting all stirred up about people asking us to do, or in this case, not do what we're already not doing. So, before we complain about our churches being closed, we need to accept the fact that we leave our churches largely empty anyway.
So, right, and one of the things we could do as priests, as rhetoricians, and as new ideologues, is to frame that in terms of that one thing. My new hermeneutic, right, is to fire people up against what's going on, helps build myself up, right, and it's a cheap way to feel good. But what you're saying is that it's immoral. If I hear you correctly.
Yeah, it is. It is fundamentally immoral. That doesn't mean that, and again, it's not that necessarily punditry is a bad thing. But when I fundamentally reduce reality just to its simplest, just to one element, then I've passed over into ideology. And again, there's nothing wrong with seeing things through a particular lens, as long as you're aware of the fact that you have a lens and that lens is limited. You actually, it began, it's like, well, Father Gregory identifies as Texan, and we tend to do that. We've fallen in now to the habit of constituting our identity based on empirical characteristics, accidents of birth, and that's not the gospel. But to come back to the initial question, well, can we rebel against the order? Can we sort of nibble around at the edges? What would you say to your children if they said, "Yeah, Mom and Dad, we're going to listen to you when you can see us"? But
I've seen the way most people drive.
Okay. Yeah. And my friends, and actually my brother-in-law as well, but my friends who are police officers tell me they generally don't like to do traffic stops because they never know what's going to happen. So unless it's risking physical health, they're inclined just to sort of let it slide. But but what happened here in Wisconsin, and you saw it again in Michigan, is that people really did go out of their way to flaunt the legitimate, even if imprudent, exercise of civil authority. To the point where, for example, in Michigan, people were protesting the shutdown orders, but also carrying long guns and sidearms. And I come from a world where if you're armed and in a large group, I assume that you mean
pshaw.
Mean bad things.
Pshaw. Well, yeah, right. So
let's
get to this. Okay. So one of my favorite books in political economy is Albert Hirschman's Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And I love it because it's simple. So you don't have to read the book, even though it's very short, and I recommend it. The basic idea is when those in authority over you do something that you do not like, you have, he says 3, but it's basically 2 choices. You can stay there, you can be loyal, or you can exit. Right? Now, in between, if you're loyal, right, if you're invested or you think there's a chance of it having an effect or whatever, there's also voice. You can raise your objections, you can offer a better way. Yeah, and that's the way we're set up. That's how, it's so important that information get to people so that they know how to respond to our needs and expectations, right? People who are put to serve us, whether they're producers of goods or whether there are civil servants and politicians, right? And if what they did was legal, what they are doing by carrying their rifles and their pistols, they weren't is if they were doing it legal, they were putting a punctuation mark on that voice. They were saying, and we mean it, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. But if I'm going to criticize civil authority for being taking imprudent means to good ends, then I think the protesters need to be held to that same standard. Because the difference this is the problem with taking punditry as our model of public discourse.
Good.
Carrying long rifles to the appearing at the state capitol with long rifles and handguns, or protesting and not wearing masks, not maintaining social distance. This has the practical effect of hardening the divisions. The people who agree with you already think, wow, you're great and you're amazing. The people who disagree with you think you're an idiot. But the problem is you don't end up influencing the vast majority in the middle. And so, what I would say, for example, to the protesters and to the government is like, well, what you want to do is influence the behavior and the attitudes of those who are in the middle, who are disposed but towards your position but undecided.
Yeah.
And you know what? There may very well be times when a public protest while armed is a good idea. But if your concern is, I'm the responsible alternative to the government's edict, that doesn't really communicate, I think, to the vast majority of people that you're a responsible voice. On the other hand, when, for example, here in Wisconsin, we were told we have to have safer at home because we're expecting, I think it was 1,500 deaths from COVID-19. I think we're at 400 now. So I think a lot of the orders were issued with unrealistic predictions, and that's okay because we didn't know. But then we have to acknowledge that up front we don't know, and we do it to flatten the curve, and we did. and now we want to extend them, and that can be okay too. But then we have to be very clear about this: is that we are not, we have to frame the government has to frame those orders in ways which up front acknowledge the limitations and the dynamic nature of what's being given, of the directives. And we know this as priests. We have almost no ability to get anybody to do anything. Our only authority is moral,
right.
and if it gets to the point where I have to say, because I'm the priest, I may have to say that, but at that point I've lost.
You've lost, yeah. And so, we do have priests listening as well. You do not want ever to allow yourself to be captive to the loudest, most threatening fringe in your community. So the equivalent of that happens in parish life is you'll have a big donor saying, look, if you don't do what I want, then I'm not going to give to the church anymore. Or I'm going to leave it, and that's kind of the equivalent. Is it legal? Yeah, sure, of course. It's just like carrying a long gun, open carry. It's legal. Is it legal to go and, complain at the Capitol? Yes, of course it's legal. Is it legal for a parishioner to say, if you do this, then I'll do this. If you don't do that, sure. The question isn't whether it's legal or something. Is it good? Is it useful?
Yeah, and is it useful? Yeah, and
as a priest, what would be your response if someone gave you that ultimatum?
About the money?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I can tell you what I did when it happened. Because when I was you're frozen again. So when I was a new priest in California, there was an individual who was dying. They called me, and the death was, a ways away, but they asked me to come visit. So I visited, and they said, I want to put your mission in the will, and it was a substantial amount of money. But I want you to promise me that you will use this money to buy land to put up a building. And I said, well, first of all, thank you for the generosity, and talked to her, and I'm very sorry of pending death. But I said, I can't accept that gift with the conditions that you've put on it, because I don't know what the future is going to bring. It did the whole. I mean, it was still like, a couple of years into the mission in a very unchurched part of the country. It wasn't even clear that the mission was viable. And it's like, I wasn't going to make a promise I wasn't certain I could keep. And we all know this. A large chunk of money comes in, and the priest makes a promise, but the parish council gets to spend it. And she was really angry. It's like, well, but you want me to make a promise? I can't make this promise. It's not because I think you're asking me to do anything wrong. I just can't guarantee. I can't give you what you want, which is a guarantee. But as it happened, I eventually got thrown out of the parish. Not for that, but because, look, you can't. You can't. People can't throw their weight around.
Right.
And that gets back, I think, to the question of civil disobedience. It's okay to it's even a good thing to protest an unjust law, but you have to be willing to accept the consequences.
Yeah, and so those in authority, this whole exit voice and loyalty, another thing that it brings to mind is that when people give voice, as a leader, you don't have to give in, right?
No.
The simple act of listening, of saying, look, I value you, let's talk about this, right? How many times have you disarmed an opponent by bringing them into that kind of intimate conversation, right? Yeah. And that's what has to be done. So we're not in opposition, we're in conversation, right?
Right. here in Wisconsin, the governor, I think it's the director of public health, extended the shutdown order to the end of May. The Democratic mayor, the governor is a Democrat. The legislature is in the hands of the Republicans. The Republicans in the legislature have now brought the governor to the state Supreme Court, arguing that the extension of the state safer at home order is illegal. My guess is that the court will side with the legislature, and that doesn't mean. And what that means is that for the governor to extend the order, he needs to consult with the legislature, and the legislature needs to consult with the governor. So, as I told one of my parishioners, I think both sides are going to be in the situation of the dog that catches the car. Now what? They're going to have to talk to each other. I don't know that they will. I think that they will, because I think politics here is very contentious. But ideally, yeah, we should bring in people who have, as we say, stakeholders, or people who are going to have some going to bear some of the costs of our actions. And this actually is my one substantive concern about the safer at home orders, is that they are largely framed in coercive terms. I think, and I think we need to frame these kinds of orders by giving people information so that they really can make their own risk appraisals. The original estimates of 200,000 dead in America assumed a 50% compliance rate with social distancing and personal hygiene, things like that. Turns out compliance is like 90%. People are opening restaurants in California and discovering that customers don't want to come. I don't think things are as stark as either side imagines. We have to help people understand and make good decisions for themselves, and then be prepared for the fact that some people will simply make bad decisions.
Right. Now I want to, this is a conversation that we need to continue, because I still don't know if everyone hears what we're saying, because it's so different from the way it's being approached in the media and in the political conversation. But the whole gist of my discussions on this, my sharing my thoughts on this, whatever comes to my fool head, is that the diversity is part of our it's given by God, and learning to love your opponent is learning to listen to them and value the gift that they're bringing to the table, valuing their witness, right? And we're not doing that so well, and we need to do better. Now, in this ethical decision making, we've talked about some of the major dimensions of it, and I just want to point out, you can't assume that the dimensions are the same across domains.
No. Yeah, exactly.
So we have this way of thinking about it, and especially since they're polarized, right? You're in one camp or the other, and then you move and you say, okay, how are my bishops reacting in this situation? And then we figure out which camp they're in.
Right.
No, stop it. That's not what's going on. Ecclesial domain, church domain, is a different domain than the authority of the government, and it's different than the economy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, and because it has come up here, and I in my own parish, I think it's come up in other parishes. People are either all in on what the bishops say, or they just, how can you do this? This is a lack of faith. As I've told my own parishioners, first of all, our bishops are in the New York, New Jersey area, so their frame of reference is really very different from ours. I'm in Madison. We have had, very few, relatively few COVID deaths or infections. But a bishop needs to make a series of decisions that are good for the entire local church, not just a particular congregation. And I think, for example, here in Wisconsin, I can have a total of 9 people in church, including myself. The problem with having 9 people in church, and even in our small space, we could maintain appropriate distances, was that gets broadcast, then people in other parishes, other parts of the diocese, or other parts of the church see that, and they say, well, in Madison, Father Gregory has 9 people in church. Well, why can't we have 9 people in church? Well, because you live in New York City. It's like, well, but it becomes very much a contentious issue. Being a part of a community sometimes means that, I can't do the things which I want to do and even can do, because doing them is harmful to the common good. Now, I think the letters that just came out from Metropolitan Montoni and Archbishop Daniels is very good. That second paragraph, they talk about how they want to open all the churches at the same. They want to open all the churches at the same time. You read down towards the end of the paragraph, they say, but situations in different states, but this may not be possible because things are different in different states. California is relaxing its restrictions, but New York is probably not going to do that for the foreseeable future. But we have parishes in New York and California. We're moving towards the second phase in Madison, which means that our restrictions will be looser. So, we're going to be in a position maybe to have more people in church sooner than a parish, say, in New Jersey. But that has to be discussed. That has to be thought out. I don't get to just make this decision by myself. And the bishops, the bishops are responsible, for all of us, and that means making decisions that are sometimes not easy for some of us.
And it's hard for them too. People don't get this. Yeah. That making unpopular decisions where there are these competing goods that you have to sacrifice. It's incredibly difficult. And the reason why the principle of subsidiarity, of doing things at the lowest level possible, does not lead our bishops to allow parishes to make that decision, is because of the data. I mean, just how we behave. If you look at what happened, we don't have perfect information about about the rules in different parishes and the outcomes.
Right.
But we do know that there are parishes where they were allowed to celebrate Pascha with over 100 people, and that the virus is now running rampant through those communities, and we're seeing that.
Right.
And as a result, in Moscow, you had the patriarch come out and say, "No more, only closed doors. We're not going to have any more of this."
Right, and again, we're back to decisions, in uncertainty, because we don't necessarily know that the circumstances in one parish, how they relate to circumstances in another parish, even from the point of view of public health. The other thing, and I think sort of in defense of the bishops, not that they need my defense, they're both grown-ups, they can handle it, but I don't know how it is for you or for other priests, but I have not had a unstressful conversation with anyone in my parish. No matter how pleasant, the conversation is on one level, underneath that, everybody I've talked to is really stressed and really anxious. So that's just me in a community of maybe 40 or 50 people. I have people who have, I would say young parish, but I still have people with chronic health issues. I have people who are going to who they're all doing well economically, thank God. But at some point they realize there's going to be a problem. So there is no easy conversation. And I have people in my parish who think safer at home order. Yeah, Governor Evers, he's the man. He rocks. Except for the people who think Governor Evers, he's just the great opponent of religious and civil liberty. The only thing that's certain is that if I'm somewhere in between, nobody's happy with me.
Well, and
at least on that issue.
Right, and let me just pull you out on one more thing. So we were talking earlier about secular authority and how we do need to obey rules that we don't agree with, as long as they are not, they don't cross this certain threshold. More so when it comes to the things that our bishops say. More so when it comes to because if I say, oh, well, I'm going to listen to my bishop when it comes to this set of things, right? But I know better than they do in this set of things, right? What happens? What happens to my soul? What happens to the soul of my community?
Well, yeah. I mean that's kind of pride and narcissism. And I can't. I can't pick and choose when to obey the bishops any more than I can pick and choose when to love my wife.
Right. And we have this.
I'm all in.
Right. We're all in. We're loyal. Right. Exit voice loyalty. We know where exit leads. Right. And we also happen to love and trust our bishops, even when we disagree with them. And this was one of the themes that I went on again. It came into my full head on I believe it was Friday. Just talking about how awesome it is to serve in a patriarchate and in a church where the voice of the laity and the priests are valued so much that there's an institutional process for bringing in their witness, right? This is awesome. So I try to lead my parish in the same way that my bishops lead our church, and so I ask for input. Where are y'all? Let me know. How are you doing? And then I also explain this is why we're doing what we're doing and so on. To try and teach that, rather than, it must be this way or something like that. Well, one more thought. So clean up anything that I messed up there.
Well, no, I don't think you messed up anything. It's I don't know if you've seen the Facebook meme. Be patient with your pastor. He's never led a congregation during a pandemic. Well, but you know what? That's true for the President of the United States, the governors of all 50 states, the mayors of all our municipalities, our bishops, our pastors, our parish council members, our laity, our parents, nobody has ever had to do this. And my brother put out on his Facebook page a whole series of things that people are doing in response to circumstances, and it's sort of an a not a kind of list. And at the end of every a not a thing, he says, "And what should you do? Be kind."
Be kind. Yeah.
We're going to disagree. We're going to make different risk appraisals for ourselves, for our families, for our diocese, our congregations, and we're not always going to agree on the practical aspects. But we do need to exercise, I think, forbearance and kindness. And I would go back to what I said before. I think we have allowed ourselves to be too influenced by the current fascination with punditry. I read stuff all the time, and I think to myself, gosh, I agree with you. I just am so sad that you're a jerk. And and it's really not about convincing the other side. It's about ministering and caring and frankly even convincing the people who are eavesdropping. I don't have to convince you, but there are lots of people who are listening who hopefully they'll come away with thinking, all right, maybe things are more complicated than my side suggests.
Right, and that generosity, this should be the impulse that we nurture, a generosity, because we can convince ourselves, the other, our opponent, that they are trying to destroy America, with one way or another.
Yeah,
right. But that's not what they're doing.
Yeah, actually, just real quick, because you're freezing up, but I hope you can hear me. You just used the phrase "the other," and we hear that phrase a lot. My first introduction to it was in the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas, French philosopher, and he talks about the otherness of the other. But Levinas was an Orthodox Jew as well as a philosopher, and for him, the other was the widow and the orphan in the prophetic literature, the stranger and the sojourner. And he says the other is he, or actually she, who calls me to my responsibilities. So today we talk about you've othered me, or you've made me an other, and that to exclude. But for Levinas and for the biblical witness, the other is that person who reveals to me my responsibilities. And see this, so great. It's when we look, we when we in the face of the other, I see my responsibilities. And that's always in the face of the other. It's not in the face of a category or a law. But in your face, I see my responsibilities.
And Christ named that responsibility, and he called it love. And I cannot love someone if I've come at them straight away with judgment, if I do not listen and know their hearts. So, anyways, well, Father, it's always a pleasure to spend
always
time with
life,
you.
Father.
Oh my goodness! And if you ever get sick of temperatures that drop below freezing in May, we've got lots of room down here in the South for you, and better barbecue too. So.
All right. Well, we'll table the barbecue conversation for another time. Though my wife reminds me, I in fact do like Southern barbecue as much as Texas barbecue.
Well, yeah, but Madison barbecue doesn't make the top 10. I wouldn't think.
It does if I make it. So, but
all right, brother. Well, I got to go write some term papers. So, until next time, everybody. Godspeed.
Bye-bye.